Kidnapped in Syria, murdered by an apparently British Islamist. The extraordinary life and horrific death of a young American journalist, Jim Foley.
It testifies to his courage. He was courageous to the end.
No just God would stand for what they did yesterday and what they do every single day.
Good evening. The wisdom of an American president invoking what God would think about an Islamist murder remains to be seen. The family of Jim Foley have implored Islamic State militants to release their other hostages, believed to include around 20 journalists. Tonight, we speak to one of his close friends who spoke to him hours before he was taken in Syria. In Britain, the shock has been as much at the London accent of the murderer. Confirmation, it seems, not only that Britons are going to the fight, but that they are at the darkest heart of the killing.
From what we've seen, it looks increasingly likely that it is a British citizen. Now, this is deeply shocking, but we know that far too many British citizens have travelled to Iraq and travelled to Syria to take part in extremism and violence.
And tonight, only 8 months after he was suspended by the Lib Dems for bringing the party into disrepute, Lord Reynard has been rehabilitated. His critics are incensed. His supporters hope you won't notice. Fear and loathing on the streets of Ferguson, Missouri for another night. Enter not Obama, but his top legal officer, promising justice and pleading for calm. Will anybody listen? First came the Neanderthals, then came we, the accepted pecking order of evolution. But new research shows that we lived side by side and did a few other things together for a good 5,000 years.
And something doesn't smell right. Elizabeth Arden reports its biggest losses as sales of celebrity-endorsed perfumes plummet. But is it any wonder people don't want the aroma of Justin Bieber and Taylor Swift?
If there was a One Direction perfume and you didn't like the smell, would you still buy it because you're loyal to the brand?
Probably not. Yeah, I probably have to like the smell more than the band.
He'd been missing in Syria since November 2012, but hopes among Jim Foley's family and friends that he might one day be released were shattered late last night when a video emerged of his murder by a masked member of the Islamic State militant group. The killer, speaking with an English accent, warned President Obama that more American hostages would die if US fighter planes continued their attacks on IS forces. Within the last hour, the president has said America would continue to do what it must do to protect its people. This program has decided not to broadcast any moving images from the murder video, but due to the nature of the events, you may find this report by our international editor, Lindsay Hilson, distressing.
Jim Foley, journalist and photographer. In Aleppo shortly before he was kidnapped in 2012 and held by Islamic State militants. It wasn't the first time. He'd been taken by Gaddafi's forces in Libya the previous year and reflected on the experience.
You don't want to be defined as that guy who got captured in 2011, you know, and I believe that frontline journalism is important, you know. Without these photos and videos and first-hand experience, we can't really tell the world how bad it might be.
Jim Foley wanted to expose the suffering of others, but ended up suffering himself. We will only show a small part of the video his killers put out. It was a message to America, they said.
The United States would be prepared to take targeted military action in Iraq.
And showed President Obama on August the 7th, announcing the bombing campaign against the Islamic Front in Iraq. Foley is dressed in orange like a Guantanamo Bay prisoner.
American citizen of your country.
His apparent killer speaks with what sounds like a British accent and threatens another kidnapped American reporter, Stephen Sotloff, if the bombing doesn't stop. This morning, Jim Foley's mother, Diane, hugged friends outside their home in New Hampshire. After nearly 2 years of dreading the worst, his parents now know it.
It haunts me that how much pain he was in and how cruel this method of execution is as opposed to so many others. So it testifies to his courage. He was courageous to the end.
President Obama was grim-faced, speaking with controlled anger, but announcing no change in policy. The bombing of ISIL, as he calls it, will continue.
Jim Foley's life stands in stark contrast to his killers. Let's be clear about ISIL. So ISIL speaks for no religion. Their victims are overwhelmingly Muslim, and no faith teaches people to massacre innocents. No just God would stand for what they did yesterday and what they do every single day.
The Prime Minister returned early from his holiday, his aim of keeping British soldiers out of the renewed war in Iraq looking more difficult by the day. Islamic State militants have been seizing more territory in Syria even as they fight in Iraq. They're believed to be holding about 20 journalists, some Western, most Arabs, around their stronghold of Raqqa. In recent weeks, at least 2 Sunni tribes in eastern Syria have rebelled against the harsh rule. Several hundred men have been beheaded in punishment. Local people have long been terrorized. Now the world has understood the cruelty and horror of the Islamic State. Jim Foley had a life of adventure and passion. His death presents a terrible dilemma for the British and American governments, trying to hold back the tide of extremism and brutality.
Well, joining me now from New York is the photojournalist Nicole Tung, a close friend of Jim Foley, who had travelled many times with him to Syria. Thank you very much for talking to us tonight. I know it'll be very difficult for you. I mean, let's begin with what would you want the world to know about this man?
Thank you for having me. I think that what's important for the world to know is that his life and his work should be remembered very clearly and for a long time, because he was there to document what was happening inside Syria, as he had done in Libya and Afghanistan before that. So he was no stranger to foreign reporting and conflict reporting, and I think that it's essential to know that the risks that journalists take to bring these stories to the world still continues today, and especially for freelancers. So I think that in his memory, I think we should try to understand that it's no easy feat to report from these places.
Can you tell me how you came across him and a little bit about his time in Libya? Because he was locked up before there. You know, he'd been through terrible experiences already.
Yes. So I first met him in Libya. He actually introduced himself to me. He came up to me and was offering to, if I needed a ride somewhere, he would be more than happy to do that. And that's the kind of person he was, just very warm and very giving and very generous. And it was unfortunate that he was locked up in Libya by the government there at the time. It was, just an unfortunate circumstance, and another journalist had been killed in the same incident during the capture. But I think that experience didn't deter him from reporting anymore. It actually propelled him forward and made him stronger, if anything, to report and to continue doing his job. And he was not a reckless person. It was that he was just so passionate about what he did, and he knew the risks involved, but he felt compelled to stay and to report. I mean,
how did he approach those risks, particularly in Syria? Because he spoke to journalism students after his imprisonment about how he felt compelled to report from these places and that these stories needed to be told.
Yeah, I think that he approached those risks in Syria very calculatedly. It wasn't something he went headstrong into without thinking of what the consequences could be. So, we often talked about what the risks were and how we could go about doing things as safely as possible, as much as we could in a place like that. And at that time, the kidnapping risk was not as high as it is until, he was taken, and a few months later when it escalated. So we were very cautious about the other threats, such as bombings and bullets flying around. So, I think that he had thought about it a lot, but it wasn't going to be something that cowed him into not going at all.
You spoke to him hours before he was taken. Can you tell me about that and what kind of mood he was in?
Yeah, I was actually on email with him before he left to take a vehicle to the border. And at that time, he was very positive. There was nothing suspicious about his emails or pointing to any kind of discomfort that he was in. He was actually filing stories from inside Syria before he came out. And he was in a good mood, actually. He was ready to get out for a bit. I understand that he had a close call with a tank shell the day earlier, and he was said, right, I'm, just need a bit of time out, so I'm coming out. And, I think that he was just ready to get out, and he was telling me that we'd meet up on a Turkish border town that evening, and, we would probably go for dinner.
He had been held hostage for so long. Did you think he was going to get out?
Yes, actually, myself and fellow journalists, colleagues, and friends all held hope that he would, be released. It was only going to be a matter of time. So I think that while it's not particularly surprising that ISIS took these measures, I think it all came as a very deep shock to us in the journalism community, especially where, we're a very tight-knit group of people and we're almost like family. So we didn't think that maybe this didn't really occur to us that this would happen, and especially so suddenly.
I mean, you say you're a tight-knit group and everybody sees everybody when you're going into places and when you're covering stories. What impact do you think it will have on that community?
I think that it's, it definitely makes us pause for a moment of reflection and sadness because, Jim was friends to many people, and he had met many people in his reporting trips. I think that, however, it's not going to stop freelancers and journalists in general from reporting in conflict zones, because this is our job. This is what we do, and we understand those risks, and we honestly hope that it never happens to any of us again. But unfortunately, this is a sad reality of our profession. So, I still have some friends working in Iraq at the moment, and many others working in Gaza. So this is not something that will make the world stop spinning, but it is definitely a very sobering day for all of us, in which, we'll definitely remember Jim very fondly, but we'll miss him for a long time to come.
Nicole Tung, thank you very much indeed for talking to us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christian. Now, the apparent London accent on that video sent chills down spines here in London. The Prime Minister broke off his Cornish holiday to take charge of the government's response. The Metropolitan Police Counter-Terrorism Unit has launched an investigation and warned that the downloading and dissemination of the video, even in fact simply viewing it, could be regarded as a terrorist offence. And there are mounting questions about the number of British jihadis going out to fight with the Islamic State. Here's our Home Affairs correspondent, Simon Israel.
As a government, you have been at the forefront of the aggression towards the Islamic State. You have plotted against us and gone far out of your way to find reasons to interfere in our affairs. Today, your military air force is attacking us daily in Iraq.
This is the British voice, a voice we have never heard used in such circumstances before.
Any aggression towards the Islamic State is an aggression towards Muslims from all walks of life.
You have plotted against us and gone far out of your way.
We have asked this professor of linguistics to help locate the accent in the hope of establishing where he might have lived in the UK.
I would say that he's speaking something that we call multicultural London English, a new accent, if you like, multi-ethnic accent in different parts of London. There are one or two small features that suggest that maybe he comes from overseas, that maybe he's not originally, he's not English born. Maybe he came as a child or a teenager.
He calls himself John in the video, and there are reports tonight that his identity may be known to the security services. Experts believe it will not be beyond their abilities to narrow down a list of possibilities.
I'd be very surprised if they hadn't already narrowed it down to 2 or 3 people, because we know that there are clusters of British foreign fighters who are staying together, and we know their rough locations. We also know the rough locations of the hostages where they are being held.
There have been several British jihadis featured on ISIS videos in the past, but not one which portrays a declaration and an act of murder. David Cameron broke off his holiday to return to Downing Street to head the government's response to the crisis.
It is an act of murder, and murder without any justification. Now, we have not identified the individual responsible on the video, but from what we've seen, it looks increasingly likely that it is a British citizen. Now, this is deeply shocking.
Tonight, the Metropolitan Police Counter-Terrorism Command warned against viewing, downloading or disseminating the video. It's being treated as a terrorist publication, but has already spread exponentially online, raising fears of further radicalisation.
What we must do is redouble all our efforts to stop people going, to take away the passports of those contemplating travel, to arrest and prosecute those that take part in this extremism and violence, to take extremist material off the internet, and do everything we can to keep our people safe.
It's accepted some 500 people from the UK have travelled to Syria to fight, 250 of them from London alone. The first 6 months of this year has seen 69 people arrested on their way to Syria, almost 3 times the number in 2013. And in the last 12 months, there's been a 41% increase in referrals to a Home Office-funded de-radicalisation programme called the Channel Project.
If this really is as serious a threat as everyone in government says it is, the Prime Minister should do what he should have done really half a year ago, which is to convene Muslim community leaders and to think about how you can aggressively push the message to young British Muslims that going to Syria is not a good idea.
Tonight, leading Sunni and Shia British imams and clerics have released a video rejecting the ideology of the Islamic State in the hope of countering any influence the James Foley video may invoke.
Simon is our reporting. Well, we're joined now from Birmingham by the Labour MP Khalid Mahmood, who claims that at least 1,500 British Muslims have joined the Islamic State fighters. And from Albany in New York State, we're joined by Richard Barrett, a former British diplomat and intelligence officer. Thanks for coming on the programme. Let's start with you, Richard Barrett, in upstate New York. I mean, we've been talking for the last decade and analysing Al-Qaeda. How, in essence, does IS, Islamic State, differ from Al-Qaeda?
Well, I think you've seen from the video that they don't differ from Al-Qaeda very much. I mean, this is the sort of thing that we associated with Al-Qaeda for many years now. And indeed, the origins of the Islamic State are directly in Al-Qaeda. So I don't think that we should make any discrimination, although, of course, the Islamic State is now trying to establish territory for itself rather than just commit terrorist acts overseas.
Is that the big difference, that they are not just the kind of the amorphous and rather secretive base spread around the globe, but they have actually seized territory that they're trying to hold, they're trying to organize themselves economically, perhaps they're just better organized as a whole? Is that the big difference, if there is one?
Well, they've been able to do quite a lot in rural areas, but apart from Mosul in Iraq and Raqqa in Syria, they haven't really tried yet to establish themselves in urban areas. We'll see what happens in Aleppo over the next few days. And I think that once they get into those bigger urban areas, they'll probably find it much harder to cow the population in the way that they have so far, and also to move around so easily. And I think that the real tests of governance will come when they're in those big areas where they have to rely, of course, on public support to a certain extent.
There has been some suggestion that the fact that they killed James Foley and the fact that they showed this video might actually be a sign of desperation because the airstrikes were working reasonably well. Do you buy that theory?
Well, the airstrikes have worked pretty well, of course, in driving them out of Mosul Dam and in destroying some of their equipment. But it's another matter, of course, to beat them up completely. And a lot of people there who will disappear in twos and threes or even in bigger units and be very hard to reach with airstrikes. So airstrikes can only go so far. You have to have people who are going to take them on hand to hand, if you like, or much closer quarters, as we saw with the Peshmerga around Mosul.
Richard Barrett, thanks very much. Let's talk to Khalid Mahmood in Birmingham. that video, that appalling video that we've seen, or some of us have seen bits of, do you think that could work as a recruiting tool for people in places like Birmingham?
Well, yeah, obviously, yes. And first of all, I think we've got to all condemn this heinous crime that has taken place. It's a definite act of murder and has to be stated as such. I mean, there are some people, some individuals who are radicalized enough to believe that this is an act that they should follow and should support. And this has been going on for a while in terms of raising these extremist individuals. I have had two young men in my own constituency who went off to Syria over a year ago, but they came back after about 9 months and were detained by the authorities because of the information that we managed to get to them. But what's happening here is that over the last, it's all right for the Prime Minister to say what he's saying now, but over the last 3 years, they took no notice of the sort of statements that I've been making and issues that I've been saying about what's going on and the amount of people that are going over to Syria. And until they start to look at addressing the real issues rather than making just TV statements, this issue will continue to happen.
Okay, so just briefly, what is the actual number of people that you think have gone over?
I certainly think now closer to 2,000. I said a couple of months ago back about 1,500. I think now I know that there are people still going across. There are no real effective controls at the border agency, both exit and return. And nobody knows what's going on. So how can we address this issue when the Prime Minister says there's a real threat to the UK? There is a real threat to the UK, but what is he doing to stop that? He's not doing anything at all to stop that because the border agency is not fit for purpose.
And why are so many more people going now than, let's say, 5 years ago?
Because more people have been radicalized. The funding that we had in terms of prevent hasn't been used properly by this government. This government has took its eye off the ball in relation to radicalization in this country, and they needed to be far more active in doing that. First of all, what they wanted to do was to go over and have a regime change in Syria of Assad. And they would prepare to support those so-called freedom fighters that they had, which is where the basis of Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra has come from to form ISIS.
Okay, and just one more. I mean, the Prime Minister's been talking about the nature of the threat here at home if and when these people come back. Presumably that is one thing that you would agree with him on.
I do agree, but what I'm asking him to do is what is it done to prevent this and stop this? Is the border agency sufficiently equipped to deal with this? And at the moment the answer is no.
Okay. One more final question to you, Rich, about in upstate New York. How can we deal with this threat? I mean, we've had American airstrikes. We've got people talking about a more inclusive government in Baghdad. What do you think is the secret sauce, if there is one at all, to try and deal with this threat of the caliphate?
I think it's really difficult to stop people going over there from all countries, not just Western countries, but of course from Middle East and North African countries as well. And of course there are local recruits to the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. So I think the main thing that we can help to happen to prevent that is to have more political understanding and strategic thought within the region itself. And for so long as there's all those tensions, for example, between Saudi Arabia and Iran and between other countries, and of course a great deal of difference of opinion over Bashar al-Assad and his regime in Syria, it's going to be quite difficult to see this ending. And so I think that the international community, as David Cameron in fact has said himself, needs to come together to try and find some sort of political solution that everybody can pull together and make the Iraqi government also capable of bringing in Sunni tribes so they don't support the Islamic State.
Indeed. Got to leave it there, I'm afraid. Richard Barrett in New York and Khalid Mahmood, thank you very much indeed. Chris.
Thanks, and you can read blogs by Lindsay Hilson, Simon Israel and me on Jim Foley's murder, including my thoughts on not watching the video itself, on our website, channel4.com/news.
This brings the matter to a close. Thus declared the Liberal Democrats last night. Disciplinary proceedings against the party's former chief executive, Lord Reynard, had been dropped and his suspension lifted. But claims that he brought the party's name into disrepute by failing to apologize over sexual harassment allegations have left a lot of bitterness in their wake. So, with an election approaching, will the party now pull itself together? Our political correspondent, Michael Crick, has been trying to find out.
It's 18 months since Channel 4 News first broadcast allegations against Lord Reynard by several women claiming he'd behaved improperly towards them.
He was touching my legs and touching my knees.
Started moving his hands down their backs to places where they had absolutely no business being.
Chris Reynard was seen by friend and foe as an election wizard, the brains behind many historic Liberal Democrat triumphs. But for years, complaints that he'd abused his position to make unwanted advances seemed to be brushed aside.
They're saying nobody wants to make a formal complaint, and I'm saying, well, I'll make a formal complaint, and they're saying, well, that's a shame because nobody wants to make a formal complaint.
A party inquiry by QC Alistair Webster found on balance that Reynard had done wrong and said he should say sorry. But Webster couldn't find enough proof to take disciplinary action, and when Reynard refused at first to say sorry, he was suspended. But now, after another inquiry, that's been lifted.
The party has a process. We spent, I think, 14 months on this. It's been very difficult, very painful, particularly for the women who were involved. But, the decision has been made that there was no evidence to pursue an expulsion of Lord Reynard. He's being readmitted, and we welcome him.
Chris Reynard issued a statement today, welcoming the decision.
I'm obviously pleased that all disciplinary investigations against me have been brought to an end and that the suspension of my party membership has been lifted. All allegations made about me have now been investigated thoroughly, including by the Metropolitan Police Service. I remain a committed member of the Liberal Democrats and a strong believer in the principles of the party.
Meanwhile, one of the alleged victims says she's been promised Lord Reynard won't have a role in the forthcoming election.
I've had private assurances from Tim Farron, the party president, that he won't be involved in the 2015 campaign, and I got that last night by text message. I really feel that he shouldn't be involved at any level beyond being a member of the House of Lords.
Hello, Michael. How are you? How's it going? Right, I see.
Good afternoon, Mr. Farron. You know what we want to talk to you about.
And this afternoon, here in his Westmoreland constituency, I caught up with the president of the Liberal Democrats, Tim Farron.
Your critics will say you've chosen expediency and opportunism over fairness and justice.
I don't think that's true. I've been very critical of how the party have handled the Reynard affair in the years gone past, both unfair, I think, to Chris Reynard and especially to the women concerned. If you allow complaints to fester and you don't deal with them, you kind of deserve what you get at the end of it all, and we've paid the price for that. And all I could do, I guess, as president, when this first came up, we're talking 18 months ago now, is to try and make sure that the processes and the systems we have now in our party are the best they can be. And it's much better to learn from other people's mistakes, but it looks like we've had to learn from our own, and clearly as a party we've handled this badly, and this is where we find ourselves today.
But people will see this and say that you're simply clearing the decks ahead of a general election. You don't want the embarrassment to continue.
Yeah, as a perverse, I think, conclusion, it's certainly not the case. The reality is that there was a disciplinary process that dragged on for a long time, but our procedures are better now than they were, significantly better, but nevertheless they are lengthy and they are thorough and have been thorough, and that's the outcome that we've got. And I guess as the president of the Federal Party, I am to have no opinion on a quasi-judicial matter. We've just got to get on with it now, but I don't think many people will think that the outcome has been great for anybody.
Did Chris Reynard do anything wrong?
Well, that's a great question. You have to look at the Webster.
Let's have a great answer.
Well, let's look at the Webster report, and clearly Webster felt there was something that needed to be apologised for, and you can read into that what you like. And well, I think the Webster report was clear enough to make that the case.
So he did do something wrong, you think?
Well, I mean, that's what Webster concluded, and that's what I think most reasonable people would conclude as well.
Will Chris Reynard play a role in the general election? He's a great strategist.
No, I mean, Nick Clegg's made it quite clear.
Why not? I mean, why throw away this man's services? I mean, he's one of the most brilliant electoral strategists in British politics.
That might be the case, and I've got a very high regard for his achievements over the many years with us. But it's been made very clear by both Nick Clegg and by myself that the consequence of all this, that the confidence that the public would have in a campaign that was in any way influenced by him, confidence many people in the party would have over a campaign that in any way was influenced by him would be very minimal, to say the least, and it wouldn't be right to do that.
So
And that's a decision that I think we need to stick to. Nick Clegg made that very clear back in January, and I think he was right to do that, and I think that will remain.
One of the women concerned says that women will leave the party in large numbers.
I hope that's not the case. I don't think that'll be the case, but I understand why lots of people will feel that this was handled poorly over a decade or more. And you know, we have to hold our hands up, and I'm not here to defend the party's management of this over a decade or more. My job is to try and make sure things are far, far better in the future.
A spokesman for Lord Reynard says he's made no decisions about his future, but it's hard to see him quietly drifting into retirement. Politics and the Liberal Democrats are his life, and surely it can only be a matter of time before he tries to resume at least some of his old roles. And then, of course, this embarrassing saga could well be resumed. Michael Crick, Channel 4 News, Westmoreland.
Still to come tonight, a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. But are the days of celebrities lending their names to perfumes nearing an end after at least one major cosmetics firm reveals a slump in sales? Now, President Obama's top legal official has arrived in the troubled town of Ferguson, Missouri, after another night of clashes between police and protesters over the police shooting of an unarmed black man. The Attorney General, Eric Holder, is meeting local leaders in the latest attempt to persuade an angry black community that justice will be done in a case that's exposed huge racial divisions. Our Washington correspondent, Kylie Morris, is in Ferguson now. Kylie.
Krish, I think it's being seen as very significant that Eric Holder is here, America's first black Attorney General, sent as an envoy from Washington. He's just had a meeting with some members of the community in which we're told he promised that there will be change here. He's also due to meet with Michael Brown's parents, who've been relentless in their search for justice for their unarmed 18-year-old son who was shot and killed, shot 6 times by a white police officer 11 days ago now. I think Eric Holder is here in order to try and rebuild some sense of faith in the justice system, but there is a lot of work to be done, as is clearly apparent when you go out on the streets among the protesters, as we did last night. Right here, right here. Only in Ferguson. The guy pointing his assault rifle at protesters and journalists is a policeman.
What do you do? Stop pointing it!
He raised it when someone asked him his name. He lowers it, reluctantly, at the urging of his colleague. The protesters, stealing a line that normally belongs to the police, put the gun down. Among law enforcement last night there was anxiety and confusion. There are now at least 3 forces policing the protests. There was no tear gas, but they used mace against individuals in the crowd. We're not sure why. Officers chased down protesters, even as their superiors told them to fall back. They're being told to fall back, but they're not stopping. Police have chased a couple of men down the street, and you can see the police are in a pretty agitated state.
All commercial media need to get back to the designated area immediately.
We became sealed in with the protests and had to lower our camera when one very angry young man threatened that if we shot another frame, he'd take us out. He then smashed someone else's camera.
I wrote a song today. It was for my people, for my people.
But that's not the full story. For much of the night, the protests were peaceful. The mood was positive. Protesters walking the street, remembering Michael Brown, demanding justice by tweeting, Instagramming it all out on their smartphones and tablets. Their ability to do that defined in part by this very ordinary-looking guy who took to the streets himself yesterday. St. Louis native Jack Dorsey is the billionaire co-founder of Twitter.
No, you're not chatting? I have my microphone and done.
Okay, so we need to look you up online. Okay.
I'm there. I'm easy to find.
Okay. Jack Dorsey's online contributions, just one example of how social media has organised and amplified what's happening in Ferguson in an unprecedented way in the US.
Social media is directly responsible for why you see so many people out here. Why you see people talking about Michael Brown in different cities across America and across the world.
Yeah.
It gets it out instantly.
There was instant news of another killing late yesterday. Shockingly, a second young black man shot dead by police only a few miles from Ferguson, inside the St. Louis city limits. Police say he was armed with a knife. Unlike in Ferguson, after the killing of Michael Brown, the St. Louis Metropolitan Police this time gave their account of the circumstances in quick time.
Suspect moved towards the passenger, the police officer that was in the passenger seat of the vehicle, at which time he came within 3 to 4 feet of the officer, and the officer shot. Both officers fired their weapons, striking the suspect, and the suspect is deceased.
But we won't be quiet until justice is served.
This is a time for transparency. The community demands nothing less. In the case of Michael Brown, a grand jury was convened this morning, finally, under tight security and restrained protest. One state senator warning that if the white police officer Darren Wilson is not charged, these recent riots will seem like a picnic. No one has a time frame at this stage for how long it will take this grand jury to reach their decision. It may be a matter of weeks. So in the meantime, it seems that there could still be some critical moments for this community and for those who would govern them before there's any kind of resolution to what happened to Michael Brown and any sense that they can move beyond that.
Thanks, Kylie. Now, a second man has been arrested on suspicion of manslaughter in connection with the death of a man inside a container at Tilbury Docks at the weekend. The man from Londonderry in Northern Ireland is also suspected of facilitating illegal entry into Britain after a total of 35 people were found when the container was opened on Saturday. Cordelia Lynch has heard from some of those held in the container. Here's her report.
This is the container 35 desperate Afghans tried to enter the UK in. Cramped conditions that left many of the group with severe dehydration and hypothermia. Their bags and what looks like a stool, the only trace of the terrifying journey that ended in one man's death. Today, a second suspect was arrested on suspicion of manslaughter. Police said the 33-year-old man from Londonderry voluntarily attended a police station in Essex. In South London, some of those believed to have been inside the container described it as a tragedy, but they did not want to share any more detail with us. The risk they took is sadly far from rare. This video, posted last year, shows a group including Afghan boys in a kayak. They say they haven't eaten for 5 days and talk of hoping to make it to Victoria Park in London. They jump in the water, hoping to cool down. We cannot verify the exact location, but every week Afghans are paying to get on makeshift rafts like this, hoping to make it to Western Europe. In Greece, these teenagers say, we hope one day we'll just make it somewhere. Many Afghans are now sharing these videos to warn about the dangers of migrants losing their lives on these epic journeys. Journeys organised by multiple agents that are paid thousands of pounds.
Psychological abuse that takes place specifically within relationships could be made a criminal offence under plans being considered by the government. At present, there is no specific offence of domestic abuse. Instead, there are more general laws covering violence, stalking and harassment. Now, the Home Office is consulting on whether to make coercive and controlling behaviour within intimate relationships a crime. Ministers hope it will improve the way the issue is dealt with by police.
At least 36 people have been killed by landslides triggered by torrential rain in Japan. Loosening slopes gave way on the outskirts of Hiroshima City after the equivalent of 1 month's rain fell overnight. Authorities say another 7 people are missing. The Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has dispatched several hundred military personnel to help with rescue efforts. In Gaza, the wife and infant son of the commander of Hamas's military wing have been killed by Israeli airstrikes. They were among more than 20 people killed in the territory. Palestinian militants launched more than 100 rockets into Israel. Speaking in the last few minutes, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu promised to continue to hit Hamas with unprecedented force.
Protesters who climbed a Moscow skyscraper and attached a Ukrainian flag to its spire have been charged with vandalism. The protesters also managed to paint half the giant yellow star at the top of the spire with blue paint, so it resembled the yellow and blue national colours of Ukraine. The protesters face up to 3 years in jail if convicted.
Celebrity endorsements are supposed to mean the sweet smell of success for most companies, including, of course, those that sell smells. But there are, it appears, limits to this business model. Elizabeth Arden has reported its biggest ever quarterly loss after a steep fall in the sales of celeb perfumes, particularly those of fragrant teen favourites like Justin Bieber and Taylor Swift. More and more people, it seems, don't want to smell like a teenager. Who can blame them? Our reporter Fatima Manji has been out on the high streets to investigate whether famous names still mean bigger sales. And a warning, her report does contain some serious flash photography.
She has millions of record sales. He can make teenage girls do this.
Does everybody like the smell? Yeah.
Like all celebrities, Taylor Swift and Justin Bieber launched the compulsory accompanying perfume for their brand. Bieber even won an award for his.
And I just heard that I got Fragrance of the Year, so I wanted to say thank you so much to all my fans.
His latest perfume promises his fans, known as Beliebers, he will help them unlock the dream.
But despite the image and the accessories, it seems the likes of Taylor Swift and Justin Bieber aren't as popular in the perfume world anymore. Elizabeth Arden, who make both these products, say their quarterly sales are down by nearly 30%. That's the largest drop in a decade. So it seems that celebrity perfumes may not be hitting the right note anymore.
Perfume experts say customers are becoming more knowledgeable and discerning about fragrances. So even for a younger customer, a celebrity endorsement often isn't enough.
You actually don't let it develop naturally. Yeah. We say you'll break the perfume's heart, and you don't want to do that. But actually, if you just let it develop, not sure, close your eyes.
Fragrance creator Lorna McKay believes you can trace cultural shifts through the history of perfume itself. In the 80s, we loved strong, powerful scents. In the 90s and early 2000s, it was all about the celebrity brand. So does this slump in sales signal an end to the sweet smell of success?
It could be a blip or it could be a trend. We won't know that for 10 years, really. You know, because if you think back through the ages, in the 1920s, when Coco Chanel did that wonderful Chanel No. 5, that was, you know, that was ahead of its time. But she was a celebrity in her own right. And celebrity is a sociological trend. And that's what will change before the perfume industry, I think.
But even if people seemingly no longer want to smell like Justin Bieber or Taylor Swift, not everyone has turned against celebrity fragrances. Just take this fan of One Direction perfume we met.
They have really good music. Why does that make their perfume good?
Maybe because it's just like they have like loads of publicity for it, and I just really like the perfume as well.
Smell of that? What do we think?
That makes me think of old ladies, the second one.
Really?
Yeah. Okay. I'm thinking old people's home.
When you choose a perfume, is it about the smell or is it about the celebrity?
The celebrity, mainly.
All about the celebrity. So which celebrities would you buy perfumes from?
Like Rihanna.
What kind of perfumes do you buy? What influences you when you choose a perfume?
I like to get like higher name brands because I know that sometimes they'll be better, like the scent will last longer.
It does a little bit. I'm sad to say that I am influenced by the celebrity marketing pool that they have. So I am, I guess. I think I might smell it, J-Lo.
Up until now, even the B-list celebrities have been able to launch perfumes. But if brand Bieber himself can't sell, the heyday for celebrity fragrances may well be over.
I was going to ask you who you smell of today, but that might be rude. So what perfume are you wearing?
Because I have no sense of smell whatsoever.
Nothing?
Nothing.
You don't wear
I don't know what
perfume?
you smell of. What do you smell of?
Lime, basil and mandarin, mostly.
Endorsed by which celebrity?
Nobody, just me. Anyway, we'll leave it there, I think. After the break, it looks like we're more closely related to Neanderthal man than we thought. Although a separate species, new research suggests humans overlapped with Neanderthals for more than 5,000 years. Some even interbred. Welcome back. Now, scientists have uncovered new evidence suggesting that primitive humans lived alongside Neanderthals for much longer than previously thought. The research published in the journal Nature suggests that the two species coexisted in Europe around 40,000 years ago. And using the latest radiocarbon dating methods, scientists at Oxford believe the overlap lasted as long as 5,500 years. Our science editor, Tom Clark, reports.
These days, the Natural History Museum is about as close as you can hope to get to a Neanderthal. But now, the largest ever analysis of Neanderthal remains finds that in the not-too-distant past, we lived side by side, and not just for a while, for thousands of years. Neanderthals were once top dog all across Europe. In fact, a skull found on this exact site at Swanscombe in Kent places them here 100,000 years ago. But by the time our species showed up, Neanderthals were already on their way out. This new research shows that after rubbing shoulders with us for about 5,000 years, the Neanderthals disappeared completely, leaving us, Homo sapiens, the dominant species in this landscape. Professor Tom Hyam at Oxford University led a team of 48 researchers which resampled early human sites across Europe. They collected Neanderthal and early modern human bones, tools and other artefacts. And using this machine, an accelerator mass spectrometer, they carbon dated them with extreme accuracy. The new analysis looked at 40 different sites across Europe. It shows that 45,000 years ago, Neanderthals were widespread. But when early modern humans made their way in from Africa, Neanderthals started to disappear. But it also finds there was plenty of time for our two species to interact, share cultures, even share DNA.
The fact that we can now say, with a great deal of certainty, that there was a long period of overlap increases the likelihood that modern humans and Neanderthals had some level of cultural interaction. And interestingly, what we see towards the end of the Neanderthal period is that they themselves start to do different things technologically and culturally. And people have suggested that they may have got some of these ideas from modern humans coming into Europe for the first time.
As well as teaching us how they lived, the research helps explain how the Neanderthals died out.
They were low in numbers, low in diversity, so they already were having a difficult time. Then, at least in my view, a new human species appears. It's living alongside them, competing with the Neanderthals for food, for resources, and so on. And I think that that combination of low numbers, low diversity, and rapid climate change, which also was added to the picture. So in that last few thousand years, the Neanderthal numbers dwindled, and eventually by 39,000 years ago, they've gone.
So while it wasn't our species that forced Neanderthals to the brink, we may have pushed them over it.
Tom Clark reporting. Well, a reminder of our main news tonight. World leaders have condemned the murder of the American photojournalist Jim Foley by Islamic State militants. President Obama said that he'd called Foley's family to express his condolences, but he said the US would continue to do what we must do to protect our people. Well, a little earlier, I went along to the Iraqi embassy in London to talk to the ambassador here, Faik Nawi. I asked him for his reaction to the murder and whether he feared that it could discourage the USA from its aerial bombardment of Islamic State forces.
I'm really terribly sorry to hear that, and I'm also worried about the possible loss of the life of the other journalists which has been kidnapped. But let me tell you that what these terrorists do, it's regardless what other people do, it's not a reaction to them, they do that anyway. Why did they kidnap them in the first place? So these kind of actions that if the Americans wouldn't bombard them, what would they do? They wouldn't kill one man, but they kill 1,000 more.
So is the Iraqi government having to rely on the US once again to do its work for it?
It looks like now, yes, quite much, yes.
Because you have no other choice?
We don't have any other choice. We don't have an air force at all.
You seem to have very little faith in your own army.
It's not a question of faith, it's a question of capabilities. There should be, an army is like any car. If you don't put benzene in it, it doesn't work. If it's no motor in it, it doesn't work. An army has to be recruited professionally, met professionally, trained professionally, and served professionally in order to do the job.
But this car, as in the Iraqi army, had billions and billions of dollars spent on it, poured into it. Where did all the money go?
Yeah, that's a good question.
You don't know the answer?
No.
Corruption?
But that's something to be dealt with. Maybe many would like to. when this news will come up eventually, many would like to know where did this money go.
You know, I guess the question is whether the momentum is with IS. Is their success breeding more success?
No more, actually no more. I mean, it's terribly unfortunate that this reaction of slaughtering the American journalist is part of their failure. We have to understand that.
This is a desperate measure, you think?
I believe so. I believe so, because the coverage, the air coverage of the United States has helped tremendously to turn the wave the other way.
What about British jihadis? I mean, we hear the voice of one, apparently, on this video. What would you say to someone like that, as they were preparing to fight jihad in your country against your government?
I say that God never left anybody deputying him on the earth. God has another day to call people, to tell them what you have done, wrong or right. Let leave people in peace so that they will die and face their God. And it has nothing, no deputy. We have never heard that God left any deputy. And it's a huge mistake that anybody, Muslim or otherwise, makes himself deputy of God.
To behave like God, to decide over life and death.
That's what they do. They are trying to tell people who is good, who is not good, who is Muslim, who is not Muslim. But that's not up to them.
Well, our international editor, Lindsay Hilsum, and our Home Affairs correspondent, Simon Israel, are with me now. I mean, Lindsay, do you agree with this idea that what these Islamic State militants have done is a sign that they're under pressure?
No, not really. I think it shows that they are ruthless, and this is a tactic that they're bringing out at this time. They are spreading their influence in their area in Syria, and they are under pressure in Iraq. And what they want to do is test the resolve of the West, because they know that America and Britain are very reluctant to send in more forces because of what happened in Iraq in 2003 and so on. So they want to say, look, we can do all of these ruthless things, and you're going to do nothing, because you don't care enough about your people. And they are not just beheading somebody like James Foley, they're beheading ordinary people who don't submit to them in Syria and Iraq as well.
So do you mean when David Cameron says there is no question of us going to war, in a way he's playing into their hands?
Well, what it means is that they're saying, well, what are you going to do about us then? I don't think it does show that they're desperate, because airstrikes, unfortunately, don't seem to be enough to crush this force. There needs to be more, except at this end, on the intelligence end and the borders end.
Simon, why is there such confidence that they will discover who the man with James Foley, the murderer, who he is?
Well, I think they have, the security services, and the Americans as well, have an enormous array of material. They know roughly where all the British jihadis that have gone and made it to Syria hang out. They know that. There's a town called Raqqa up in the northern part of Syria, where many of them have featured. That video apparently features certain terrain that people know about already. There is some talk that hostages that have got out, that have been freed or released, have recognized the voice and even maybe recognized the shape of the person in that, and the man in that video. And by the analysis of, not just as we saw in the package, the accent, but the analysis phonetically and so on, and probably pinpoint within 2 or 3 people who this person is.
And those reports are dropping now, that the people are getting a bit closer to who this may be.
Yes. The question is whether they can get access to this person or what happens consequently. And the Metropolitan Counter-Terrorism Command announced tonight that they're launching an investigation, because fundamentally this is a murder, and a murder by someone who is British.
Simon, Lindsay, thank you.
Fascinating, chilling stuff. That's all we have time for tonight. Thanks for watching the programme.
Until tomorrow, that's Channel 4 News from all of us here. Have a very good evening.
Good evening.
expect bright, beautiful conditions throughout the big day.
Mercure Hotels proudly sponsors the weather.
Good evening. If you're thinking ahead to the bank holiday weekend, then bear in mind that the weather's looking pretty mixed. It will be a fine start for most of us on Saturday, but rain will arrive later on Sunday and persist well into Monday. Now to